While there are many songs out there that are only famous because of their inclusion in certain movies, there are also movies out there that are primarily well known for a famous song or group of songs that are incorporated into them. However, this sometimes leads to the movies in question having a somewhat skewed reputation, as the song or scene where the song is played becomes the most iconic part, regardless of what the movie itself is actually about. So as a result, when people go to actually watch some of these movies, if only for the scene or scenes in question, they sometimes end up very surprised to learn what these movies are actually about. And today, I'd like to go over a few movies where this famously happened, where their reputation was created solely by their music and didn't exactly reflect what they were actually about. And there will be spoilers ahead for all movies mentioned. So in case I bring up something that you don't want ruined, you shouldn't continue with this video. This will be the only spoiler warning I'll be giving you. Okay, so to start with perhaps one of the most famous movies ever made popular because of its soundtrack, we have Saturday Night Fever. The movie that made disco all the rage in the late 1970s, this movie is simply about the coolest guy on the block dancing to the Bee Gees' greatest hits, becoming the disco king in the process, right? Well, not exactly. In fact, not even close. You see, Saturday Night Fever is actually the dark tale of a man barely in his 20s feeling completely empty and unfulfilled with his life, in denial but very much aware of the fact that he'll probably never get anywhere because of his poor upbringing and low-paying job. And his cool persona and disco nights are all just a desperate escape from that reality. Simply put, all of the glamorous stuff, the disco, the music, the dancing, the strut, it's all just a front to hide how empty the man really is with his life. Because while he's on the dance floor, he may be king, but that'll never change the fact that when he wakes up the next morning, he'll always be a poor nobody with little shot of achieving his dreams. And in addition to that, he actually manages to convince a girl he likes to partner up with him in the hopes of winning a disco competition and some cash in order to get somewhere. And if you were expecting the movie to end like a typical underdog story with them winning the award and that solving all their problems, you'd be sorely mistaken. Because they do win all right, but instead of being happy, he insists that the runner-ups were better than they were and rather unceremoniously gives them the award and money, causing him and his partner to fall out. And finally, there's the little detail that the movie ends with his friend committing suicide because he got his girlfriend pregnant and doesn't know what else to do, and Travolta goes back to his partner in tears who offers him comfort. So simply put, a feel-good movie this is most definitely not, and a far cry from what its disco and Bee Gees reputation would have you believe. Or to use another example of that, we have Risky Business. Now let's be honest here. This movie is famous for one reason and one reason only. Yeah, that's right. Left home alone all by himself for the first time, Tom Cruise dances around his living room to old-time rock and roll. For anybody who's never seen it, that's all they know about this movie. And because of that, one might assume that the movie is similarly goofy, with Cruise's character getting into all sorts of good-natured fun and trouble while his parents are gone, almost like Ferris Bueller's Day Off. However, That's not exactly the case here either. It isn't as dark as Saturday Night Fever, but the movie is still a lot more serious than that scene would have you believe. Because it's actually about a high schooler trying to get into a good college, all the while trying to deal with his growing interest, attraction, and lust for girls, with temptation all around him at every turn. And as a result of that temptation, he ends up involved with a prostitute and unwittingly becomes her temporary pimp, at which point the whole fate of his future can be made or broken by his association with her and what she decides to do. Now, in this case, things ultimately do work out in the end, largely because the writers had test audiences decide which ending they liked better, but the movie still does have plenty to say about the youth of the 1980s. There's even a particular scene where Cruise is talking with his friends, and they all care about making money more than anything, while he wants to do something genuinely worthwhile with his life, but all they do is mock him in reply. And indeed, while it is implied he still has that sentiment by the end, he is left more cynical from his experience, as he concludes that his endeavor was ultimately a big success because he made over $8,000 from it. And he didn't even get to keep the money. And that is all meant to show how society places way too much emphasis on money making, with the passion, integrity, and infinitely more important qualities that make life worth living being thrown aside or not valued at all. Tom Cruise even said the whole point of the movie is the character trying to figure out capitalism versus the ideals. Now, once again, it's implied that he hasn't totally given up on making something of his life other than just making money, but it also shows that he has come to see money as defining success in many ways, just like his friends, which, as already noted, is not a good way for people to think, but way too many young people do. And there's also the fact that the prostitute is put in a somewhat morally ambiguous light, with it being left up to the audience to decide whether or not she deliberately played him for a fool or was just an innocent victim, and how much she actually came to care about him by the end. And there's also the sobering reminders that it can be a cruel world out there by yourself with people willing to con you at every turn, which Cruise definitely learns the hard way. Along with the fact that the movie does not shy away from his interest in girls and how that ultimately does get him in trouble, but at the same time also leaves him better off than he might have been otherwise. In other words, the movie leaves it up to the audience to decide just how much he benefited from doing what he did, and doesn't try to say one way or the other that he did the right or wrong thing. And you have to admit, all of that is pretty deep and a bit dark for a movie that's most well known for a teenage Tom Cruise dancing around without pants. But at the same time, there are also movies whose musical reputation is more consistent with what it's actually about, with Flashdance being a prime example of that. Because the soundtrack implies a movie about a hard-working underdog who suffers some heartbreak but ultimately does come out on top, and that's pretty much just what it is. Sure, it has its highs and lows, but ultimately the movie is a lot more in line with its soundtrack than either of the aforementioned examples. It makes you feel happy, it makes you feel sad, and potentially a few other things as well, just like the music. Alright, so to put it all simply, you can't always trust a movie by its soundtrack, or famous scenes involving music. As with anything else, context is always very important, and what happens way too often in movies, especially ones that are only famous for one scene, is that the context usually ends up completely removed, causing people to make assumptions about the movie as a whole that might be totally different from what it actually is. And this is only more so the case with music, because a music scene in a non musical can often indicate something very different from what the movie is actually about, what tone it has, or is taken out of context. And that's exactly what happened to the two aforementioned examples I gave. The happy, carefree attitude of the music ultimately paints a very different picture of what the movies are about than what they actually are, and how that music is used within the context of the movie. So in the end, I would say that if there was anything to take away from this video, it's that it's very important to actually know a movie's plot before you decide to watch it based solely on one famous scene, and believe me, I did do that a couple of times, and to not make assumptions about a movie based on its soundtrack or what songs are in it. Though honestly, with the songs those movies did use, it's kind of easy to see why their reputations became so skewed over the years. Okay, I think that's about everything I've got on that. So now I'd like all of you to tell me, how heavily do you believe a movie's soundtrack should affect the reputation it has? And were you surprised to learn that some movies actually have a very different plot than what the songs that made them famous would imply? Whatever the case, please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And like always, you don't have to agree with anything I said in this video. If you think I've got everything completely backwards, that's absolutely fine. And thank you all for watching. I really appreciate all of it. And I hope to see you all next time.